You need leads. You have a business, but you don't want your outreach to be super spammy. How do you do it? I'm Sarah Noel Block, and this is the Tiny Marketing Pod. Today, I'm talking to Dan Englander, and he is going to tell me how to balance personalization and scale to keep your pipeline full and still keep those prospects happy. Some highlights you can expect for today are how to balance that personalization and scale to keep your pipeline full and not be a spammer, how to de-risk conversations so those highly skeptical prospects are saying, okay, I'll have a conversation with you. Hint, it's not stealing boring, publicly available information. And then last, divide specific prospecting and sales duties so you can avoid burnout. Not everyone who is great at prospecting is also great at closing sales. It doesn't have to be the same person. So stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Tiny Marketing. I'm Sarah Noel Block and I teach small marketing departments that are tired of feeling overwhelmed and under-resourced how to build and manage effective and efficient marketing strategies that work for them. Get ready, it's time to dig in and get a big impact with your tiny team. First, we're going to be talking about how to conduct outreach without being super spammy, which I thought was impossible. So I'm pretty stoked to talk about this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on, Sarah. And to give, a little bit of context, I think what I saw, in the early days of my career in sales, selling creative services into big companies was just like everyone playing a numbers game. And I still think that's how 99% of people are doing it. And it's just sort of like, well, if I put enough people through this process and I break some eggs, like some good stuff will come out the other side.
Yeah.
I think the problem with that approach is first, you could offend people and you could hurt your reputation and all that. But even if you don't care about that, even though that's sometimes that fear is a little overblown, aside from that, there's pretty high opportunity costs because there's maybe a lot of people that you could have won over had you just done things the right way. So what does balancing personalization and scale means? It means on one hand, we have to go in tastefully and personalized enough so that pretty much everybody that gets the outreach doesn't think they're on a list, right? On the other hand, if you just do you sort of see a lot of advice for people that are like all about grand gestures, right? Like send someone a really personalized gift, find out what they're into and, find out what football team they like and send them a helmet for that team, right? The problem with that is, for one, it's just like really hard and expensive and really hard to get that data and I'm not saying don't do that. By all means, if you're excited about doing that, give it a shot. That definitely works, as you'd expect it to. But the reality is a lot of us are also running companies. We're doing a million things, conducting those campaigns. And also, like, if you get those campaigns wrong, like you send something to the wrong address, you get the data a little bit wrong, then you've wasted a lot of time and money. So you got to balance this idea of personalization and scale. So what does that mean? For us and our clients, and for context, we're looking to help our clients get meetings, or usually our main specializations, agencies trying to get meetings in mid to large companies. We're finding strong commonalities between people that could mean they're from the same hometown, they went to the same college, they both have experience working at the same client company or working with the same clients. And then if you're phrasing that in the right way, it's a strong enough commonality to open up that door. But you're also maybe sending to 30, 50, 100 people per day and getting a lot of meetings. So that's kind of what I mean by that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So how do you get that specific information? What's your process for that?
The short answer is there's not one way, right? Internally at Sales Schema, we're doing a number of different things depending on the campaign. And we have around 15 list builders and scrubbers that we draw from. And if we're like, the craziest thing we did, for example, is we found people that used to play tennis in college because our client did that. And we're like, okay, we're going to look at these accounts they want to reach, these people they want to reach, and then Venn diagram their total addressable market with the people that share that commonality. And that meant we had list builders going on, like scraping bios on a bunch of company web pages and then putting that data together. So, but I don't want this. I want this to be valuable beyond just the prospect of hiring us. So I think if you're listening to this, like, one thing that you could do pretty easily is look at a bunch of companies that maybe presented at a trade show you went to a year ago, and instead of just trying to find anyone you could work with, start with that cohort, and maybe that's like 50 companies, and then you're saying, hey, I attended Acme trade show. What did you think of this speaker? That was really cool. By the way, we're doing this work. We've done a lot of work in your field. Can we connect? Or even just people, not even companies, but people that are in, from your same hometown. Like that data is pretty easy to get, or just in your geographic backyard. So it takes a little bit more time on the front end, but it's a lot less time on the back end because you're not playing this game where you're chasing people and saying, hey, we need 10 touch points to break through. It's like those metrics to me, and I know I'm going on another tangent and I'll give you the floor in a second, but those metrics to me are so wrong, and they're over optimizing for the wrong things, where it's just these numbers, but you're not really thinking about the opportunity cost of that, right? Of just like chasing people and saying, I need this many touch points to break through, where it's like, maybe if you'd just been a little more tasteful at the beginning, you could have just had one touch point, which is what we look at. So that's kind of how we're doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that you actually do it the opposite of what I expected you to do it. You have that thing that you're going to look for, that commonality first, and then you find the companies that would be right to work with you. So you narrow it down a lot more first.
Close. It's a little bit different than that, in that we're first starting with like not the total addressable market, but something close to it. The overall market, if you do the whole TAM at once, that's a lot of companies. But anyway, our clients are approving the companies they want to reach, the people that they want to reach, and then we're finding which people share a particular commonality, right? And then going after those people in a more specific way. And the thing with that is people will ask, well, like, what about everybody else? What about the rest of the pie, And our whole thinking is, for one, we'll probably find a way to get to those people eventually through a commonality, but you may as well start with the low-hanging fruit, right? The people that are more likely to talk to you. And then there's a lot of reasons that I can talk to you, philosophically about why that is and so on, but that's kind of how we're thinking about it, though.
And a shorter sales cycle. You said that instead of 10 touch points, it's taking one touch point to move to the next phase of that sales cycle.
In general, yeah, we might do a little follow-up, but not a lot. And that kind of makes sense if you think about yourself and all of us and kind of like how we like getting messages. Like if you see a message and you weren't interested at the beginning, okay, maybe you were just busy. Maybe it's worth another follow-up a week from now. But at some point, it's sort of like, all right, the timing is like, if you're not going to have the call, you're not going to have the call right then.
Yeah.
But the whole point is, if you come in tastefully and you can kind of de-risk that opening conversation, then it becomes a lot easier, and then you have that relationship. I'll talk about what outbound is, though, a little bit, because like you mentioned sales cycle, and it's almost impossible to know where in the buying process somebody is when you reach out to them. We sometimes get lucky, but if you think about like the market as this big like bell curve, right? There's people that on one end that will never work with you because they're happy with their solution. They've, et cetera. And then there's people, maybe 10 to 20% of the market at the other tail end that are actively looking for a solution, right? You can hit those people with outbound, but also those people are going to convert through inbound. They click an ad, they get referred, et cetera. But then there's this whole rest of the market that's vaguely dissatisfied, like we all are. Like, my podcast platform could be better, my this or that could be better, but I don't really know what else is out there. And then those are the people, which is most of the market, maybe 70, 80% of the market, that is primed to talk to you if you get in the right way. That's what outbound does. We don't know where they are in the cycle. They could be ready to go right now. They could be ready to go later. Your sales process could expedite that depending on how you're doing things. But that's kind of the way we're thinking about it.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. There's a lot of people that are, this could be better, and they're willing to listen to an alternative solution.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any specific tools that you like to work with when you're working on this personalization while also reaching out to people at scale?
Yeah, we're a little bit of a special case just because like everything, like the sending platforms we use are proprietary, and there's a lot of technical reasons for that. And a lot of the list building processes are as well. But what I'd recommend for people starting out on this is, there's a number of different sending platforms that are just for outbound. And I would think about doing that as opposed to like a newsletter platform, or like don't use like a MailChimp. So there's a bunch of good ones. We hear good things about Apollo. Apollo seems to be very popular right now. There's other ones like reply.io we've used a lot. There's Limlist. There's Airborne, which is for bigger teams doing this. So, you're welcome to kind of like search those out. If you have something that works for you really well already, I'd say stick with that. And that's pretty useful. And as for research tools and data, I think that it's better to be agile and better to like think about what you want to do and what you want to accomplish as opposed to buying a big expensive data platform that you may get that and then find out that it doesn't do what you need it to do. So I think it's better to have optionality there because you may, for example, say, I actually want to get just this niche list on this type of buyer. And
Hmm.
then if you've already invested so much on a big data platform, it doesn't really work as well. So there's a lot I can get into there, but those are, a couple ideas basically.
Okay. So a platform to be able to do your outreach outside of your typical like email marketing platform, and then a data tool to be able to do some research on them.
Yeah, and there's lots of kind of like tools that will scrape LinkedIn and stuff. We don't use those ourselves because again, we have our own processes and stuff. But I think one that
Oh,
I've used
yeah.
in the past is Lead IQ. They're pretty good, and LinkedIn Sales
Oh,
Navigator
yeah.
will get you a lot of the data. That's kind of like the hammer in the tool belt. That's like, if you're not on Sales Navigator, just pony up. It'll tell you most of what you need to know. But for us, what we're doing internally, we're more sophisticated than that. But I think that if you're starting out with this on your own and you're ready, you want to DIY some of this stuff on a smaller scale, just being able to like go on there, do a search, find the people that are local to you is one great idea. People that might have gone to the same university. If you want to get fancier, you could find out who are the people that used to work for a longtime client account. Like
Good
you've done a
one.
lot of work for Coca-Cola, and then maybe there's people that have gone on to Pepsi or whatever. That's another great way in. So there's a few ideas there.
Yeah, I like that one a lot because you might have already worked with them before, established trust with them. It's a lot easier to get in. But people bring their vendors all the time.
I would also just say one of our most successful campaigns that we do is a referral based campaign, right? So it takes more work than going direct to a prospect, but it also produces much bigger dividends, right? So most of us, especially if we've built agencies, have built ourselves up on referrals and the sort of like referrals that come to us. So on one hand, that gives you more trust than you could ever imagine. But the problem with that is they're sporadic. They're kind of hard to predict. You're reactive in that situation. So what we do is just a much more focused referral campaign. And we go to our clients. We're like, first, we're building that target account list, everybody they want to do business with, rough titles, et cetera, avatars. And then from there, we say, okay, let us know everybody in your network. Like export your LinkedIn first degree connections and tell us everyone that you actually know, not like the fake connections we have, right? And then
Yeah.
include everyone you'd be cool with connecting with, again, to get referred. So if they're like, I don't want to connect with my longtime friend, he would think it was weird if I just hit him up like this. Great, take him off the list. You can contact them on your own if you want. But then there's this middle segment of people that are like, but you don't know them that well. Maybe you haven't connected in a few years, whatever. And then what we do is we do outreach to those people. Hey, Lisa, hope you've been well. I'm working on some new business stuff here at Acme. Would you be open to connecting on a short call? And then 5 minutes before that call, we show our clients how to map those people's connections to those accounts and those titles in that list. So then they're getting on that call saying, hey, I saw a few people. I saw the CMO of Microsoft. Would you be willing to make a connection for me? And what we found is like if our clients are very specific and they make it easy and honest about what they want,
Mhm.
a lot of people will help them, and then they're getting referred like right into the right company.
Makes it so much easier. That's so brilliant.
Yeah,
Okay, so you talked a little bit about LinkedIn and Sales Navigator. What is your favorite medium for connecting or for doing outreach? Email, LinkedIn, calls?
yeah, it's a really good question, and there's some nuance to it. I think that philosophically, like the way, and we're a little bit different. We think the channel does matter, but I think it matters a little bit less than the connection that you have with the person that you're contacting. Like, for example, all the things I've just talked about, those referral connections, the strong commonalities, if we sent the same message on LinkedIn, it would probably work, pretty comparably as well. So I think that's the more important thing. That said, in terms of outreach, we like email for a lot of reasons. I think it's easier to set up, it's easier to track. It's where we do business, right? So in our inboxes, we're all planning things. We have our calendars right there. We're getting things done. LinkedIn, not always the case. That said, LinkedIn can be effective and it can work really well. Sometimes because you can see someone's face and you can kind of like see what they're about, and that can be intriguing in and of itself. But I think the issue with LinkedIn is it's harder to track, it's harder to kind of get things going, and there's just lots of noise. There's lots of people, reading things, reading articles. There's lots of spam,
Yeah.
frankly, as we all know on LinkedIn. There's also spam on email, right? So we're dealing with distractions everywhere, no matter what. But we like email for those reasons. As far as phone goes, I just want to caveat everything by saying, like, there's somebody somewhere making this work. I don't like saying this doesn't work or it's dead. For example, like if I was contacting restaurants, I think the phone's probably the way to go. I don't think there's a lot of restaurant managers or owners like reading email all day. They're probably running around. But for our world at Sales Schema, it's more white collar. So we will use the phone, or our clients will, when there's actively interest, where there's somebody that maybe wanted to talk, they got busy, that fell off. That's where kind of having these lukewarm calls makes sense. As far as dialing for dollars, cold calling, I think it's just declined more
dialing
and more.
For dollars. That's the first word for that.
Yeah. And it makes sense because, the whole world's gone remote. So finding that data is harder and more expensive than it used to be. And what happens when you get a call from a number you don't know?
I do not answer.
You don't answer, right? I don't answer either. But if you've sent emails and you've responded, oftentimes that data is getting synced to the phone and you're saying, oh, so-and-so is reaching out to me. I recognize that name. That's where it makes more sense, is like kind of mid-funnel or further down the funnel. Yeah.
Okay. So that was going to be my last question, but I just thought of something. Since email is your preferred outreach method, what is your thoughts on those personalized videos that go out with emails? Do you think that's helpful?
Good question. Yeah. So overall, I'm agnostic on this stuff. I think I've talked to a lot of people that have made that work really well. And I think, give it a shot. And if it works, it works. I think the issue that I see with it is, for one, on a technical level, I think deliverability is harder when you have videos and that kind of thing. Also, there's this kind of arms race of, I'm going to see if I can phrase this or explain this the right way. It may not work, may not stick the landing here, but there's this kind of arms race that's like, I'm going to find out a lot about you, the person I'm contacting, and then show you that I know a lot about you. And sometimes people are doing that genuinely. Other times they're using like AI or software tools to make it seem like they do.
Does it come out awkward then?
It can, but it can work too. But I think the issue is that's just like half of the equation. The other half is you and the sender and like your connection to that person, not just on a company level, but on an individual level. So I think what happens is, like, even when you show that you know a lot about the other person, if there's no connection to you, that only goes so far. And the person might be happy. They might be like, thanks, I'm glad you did your research. That's cool. But it might be less likely to get you the appointment compared to if you close that loop and you're like, hey, I have a connection to you. We have this thing in common. That's what becomes a lot harder to fake. And that's also more timeless, in my opinion, because it's more tribal, for better or worse. It's more like it stands the test of time versus like, I did all this research and I show that I know a lot about you. So that said, I think videos, can be really effective. I think that, especially like later in the sales process or like midway through, and so on. And there's people having a lot of success with them at the top of the funnel, but that's kind of just been our experience with it anyway. And that's, to shamelessly plug, that's, a lot of the philosophy of relationship sales at scale, and the book that I'm shamelessly plugging.
Oh, don't worry. I have it in my notes to shamelessly plug it. So we're going to be doing it anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to topic 2. And we actually talked about it a lot in this, and that's how to de-risk the conversations. What is something that a lot of people are getting wrong when they're doing outreach, let's say on their own? You are the expert on outreach. When people are doing it and trying it out on their own, what are they doing wrong?
Oh God, so many things. I think, the biggest one is, not being consistent enough with it. I think foundationally, it's like a who's doing what problem. So you're not perfect at this. You're not perfect at anything when you start. But I think what's happening a lot is like people have the wrong mentality going in. So they're like, oh, this is going to be an easy win. I'm going to buy a list. I'm going to send a message to the list, and then a bunch of money is going to come out the other end. The reality is it's a sales and marketing channel like anything else, like SEO, like PPC. It's a skill. You got to put in time and effort. You got to get good at it, or hire somebody else that knows what they're doing to do it. Hopefully us. But if I'm just kidding. So that's the first thing, is the right expectations going in. Beyond that, I think what people are getting wrong is they're kind of like considering it like they're in marketing land, right? And I know that you do a lot with inbound marketing and with newsletters, and it's a slightly different tone when you're doing outbound versus like when somebody's on your newsletter. So I think that
it's definitely different.
Yeah. So there's a lot of overselling. I think 9 times out of 10, when we look at the copy the clients want to use and they're like, hey, we want to use this, and then we have to like diplomatically shut it down. It's because it's too salesy. It's because it's telling people things that they do not care enough about yet to actually listen to. It doesn't mean those differentiators and those things aren't useful or valuable. It just means like they don't care enough to hear them. Like you've got to get them further into the sales process.
Yeah, they're not there yet.
They're not there yet, right? So a lot of the times, like the copy that we're sending counterintuitively looks very conversational. It's not too cheeky. It looks kind of boring, honestly, and kind of professional. It's emphasizing, it looks custom. Sometimes there's even typos. Sometimes it's kind of wall of text. It looks like the sort of thing that you might casually send out to somebody you met at a networking event, a few days later. That's probably the bigger thing. Beyond that, there's probably like a plethora of other issues. Technical stuff people get wrong, deliverability issues, trying to just, like I talked about earlier, over-optimizing for the wrong metrics, looking at click rates, having too many calls to action. Like the call to action that you want every time is get on a call with me. Like, I'm not trying to put you through a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
That's not to say that collateral won't come up later, but the main call to action is like, let's get on a 15, 20-minute call. That's what we're going for. So the list goes on, but those are a few of the top things we see.
Yeah. It sounds like the biggest thing is making sure it sounds natural and not like marketing copywriting.
Exactly. And a lot of the times, like where the company description is happening is like that second paragraph, and it's more describing something that's very pointed and specific about what you do. It's sort of like when you imagine you're walking down the aisle at CVS and you want to buy shampoo, and there's like all these ads that are like, this has aloe vera, and this does this, and this does that. At some point, you need to know if you're looking at shampoo or you're looking at lotion or you're looking at conditioner, right? Like, imagine that times 100 because somebody's scanning through their inbox. At some point, they need to figure out, like, what does this person do? And
yeah, that's a good point.
Right.
But what do you actually do?
Right, exactly. And that's where people get it wrong, and they sell too much. They want to stand out, but it's like, this isn't the time to stand out. This is the time to de-risk a conversation. And that's kind of that's all you want to do with that first outreach.
Mm-hmm. So you are reaching out to someone, let's say it's a big company, and they're getting a ton of outreach. They're pretty skeptical, and they're usually deleting all of the emails that sound like it might be outreach. How do you reach those people?
Yeah, that's the simple and hard problem. So the first thing is they have to think that you wrote just to them. If somebody in that situation thinks they're on a list, they're not going to take the call. The second is finding that strong commonality that you share, right? So if, and I'm making this up, but if I reached out to you, Sarah, and I was like, hey, I saw that you are a marketing consultant and you have a podcast. Can I sell you this thing, this software widget that helps marketing consultants? May or may not take my call unless you were actively in the market and actively looking for a solution and the stars aligned and it hit you just at the right time. You're probably not taking that call.
Yeah, that magic moment is rare.
Right, exactly. It happens, but you can't really bank on that. But if I reached out to you and said, hey, Sarah, by the way, I saw that I know you're in Illinois, you're in the Illinois area in XYZ town. That's really crazy because my grandmother was mayor of an adjacent town to you, Springfield, Illinois, let's say. That's really cool. And also, like, we've done a lot of work with podcasts that I think you might know about, including XYZ. By the way, we're this company, we sell this widget. How would you feel about that outreach compared to the first one?
That was good. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to buy your widget. That's really good.
You might not buy, and you may not even take the meeting, but you're at least probably going to respond. And at the very least, you're not going to be mad at me. And maybe you'll respond on in a week later when we say, hey, wanted to follow up on that.
Yeah, I wouldn't automatically delete it, what I normally do.
Exactly. And by the way, that's literally a campaign we just ran for a client that is in the this selling to giant companies, right? And it's worked really well. And we had to interview them to find that commonality. So I think in response to that, some people, the objections we typically hear are like, "Great, am I going to get a bunch of networking calls and people that don't ever want to buy? Is this just going to be some meandering calls?" So on one hand, sure, sometimes we don't know what stage of the market they're in, but at the end of the day, our clients are looking at the accounts they want to reach. They're looking at the titles. Don't you think it's worth having conversations with those people, with the people in your market? So there's that. And also, like, we're still talking about what our clients do. If those people are getting on that call, these decision makers, they're not dumb. They know they're entering a sales situation, but it's de-risk. Right. They know they're not going to get like hard sold because we're coming in tastefully. We're not like beating them over the head with a pitch. So they're like, I'm not going to have my time wasted. So that's kind of the vibe we're going for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And that's something that I do have a lot of lead generation people reach out to me, or more prospecting. And that is always the concern. Am I going to waste my time on calls with the wrong people or people that aren't ready to buy? And you make a good point. If you're doing the research right, then you're having the calls with the right people, even if they aren't in the right stage of the buyer's journey. I mean, that's an opportunity to network and get to know them. So that's not a lost opportunity or waste of time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that what's going on psychologically is like, and this is all my hypothesis, there's some like data a little bit to back it up, but it's mostly just my experience on this, is that there's this ancient dynamic going on that I think is kind of tribal, right? And we're sort of like, am I going to cross paths with this person again? Are they in my world? And so on. And I think there's a lot of ways to check that box, using the right terminology. Like if you're selling to doctors versus, manufacturers versus whoever, there's certain terms of art that you might use, but there's a lot of other ways to do that too. Some of which, I talked about earlier. And that's ultimately what you're trying to do, is like, if the person's like, this person's in my world and I'm probably going to run across them at some point, might as well meet their acquaintance now. That's really like what we're going for with all these campaigns.
Okay. This is my last question on this particular topic. How much research do you do on each of these prospects before you reach out to them?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's not like we're doing like this full dossier on each and every prospect. Mm-hmm. What we're typically doing is a version of that actually for the sender or for the salesperson, where we might be meeting with them, for an hour or multiple calls sometimes, interviewing them, finding out what their background's like, looking at their LinkedIn, and then finding just one particular strong commonality that is going to unite them with a big cohort of their prospects. Mm-hmm. And then that commonality, we might find that it didn't work so well, and then we move on to something else. Or we may find that it goes off like gangbusters, and then we find ways to double down on that. And then from there, that might last a few weeks to a few months. Then we're moving on to a different campaign and a different commonality to unite them with a different or bigger cohort of their total addressable market. So that's kind of how we think about it, is actually more of the research is being done on the salesperson compared to the prospect, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. So you figure out a couple different things that might work for that particular client of yours, where you could find a commonality, and then narrow down your search based off of that. Like, this person was at Content Marketing World, and these people on their list were also there. We can use that.
Yeah, exactly. Or even like a person in common. Like if there's somebody else in the company, we do a lot of those campaigns, like where there's a salesperson, but then the CEO has a million connections to everybody, but the CEO doesn't do sales, right? So being able to say, hey, I saw you Bob Smith, our CEO. That's really great. And you've known each other for this many years. I want to be a resource to you. We're doing these things. That's now, that really de-risks that call in a lot of ways. And it just takes a little bit more deliberate work and data building at the beginning, but then you're chasing a lot less after that. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's talk about dividing the prospecting and the sales process so your people don't get burnt out.
Yeah, that's a really good topic, and I actually think that that's probably like more important than any of the tactics I've talked about so far. Yeah, because that's honestly the biggest problem is the who's doing what thing, and depending on the size of your organization, it's going to be different depending on where you are. So to go to the beginning of time, I think the first thing is that if it's just you or you have like a few people, you might be handling everything, right? You might be doing prospecting and sales until you can get the resources to get help. But at least what you're doing is wearing different hats and separating your time accordingly, right? So you're thinking about prioritizing your time from bottom of top of funnel. So of course, if somebody's like at a proposal stage, they're getting more of your energy than somebody that's further up. Beyond that, the way that we think about the prospecting duties is it's actually a few different skill sets, right? Because you have the creativity, the copywriting, all that sort of thing. You have the systems thinking of list building and data and software and what comes when, and then you have hustle, right? So if you can kind of think and like following up with somebody, you get the call booked and that kind of thing. So you could separate those duties out eventually, and that's kind of what we're offering in a team capacity or fractional capacity. But if it's just you're dividing up your time between those three things, and that might mean you're spending an hour tinkering with software and delegating things to list builders. You're spending another hour following up with prospects that, might have dropped off for whatever reason. You're spending another hour writing copy, thinking about an angle of a way in and that kind of thing. And before any of that, you're prioritizing the later funnel, like opportunity stage people. So that's kind of how we think about it. I think, one of the biggest mistakes we see is even in bigger companies, even in like, companies with dozens of employees, is like the owners have done sales historically. It's been mostly referrals and inbound and that kind of thing. And then they're like, I don't want to do sales anymore. I'm going to go hire a salesperson. So they hire that full stack salesperson that's probably really good, like in an existing infrastructure. And then X months later, that person's failed. They might move on to somebody else. And then if they do that enough times, they're like, nobody can sell but me. We're special snowflake. Nobody can do this but me. And the problem with that is like there's no process, there's no systems, there's no scripts, there's no lead generation machine for keeping that salesperson fed. Right. Those things have to be built first. So if you're in that ownership capacity and you have the resources to get help, start with top of funnel. Start with, you could hire a company like ours. You could hire a junior level salesperson. You could just DIY that process to get meetings teed up consistently. Once that's happening, then you can plug in that closer, which is something we're in the middle of right now. And like my job half the time is really like sales trainer / sales ops manager, which is basically like getting our salesperson filled up with leads, so we're not sending that person off into the cold saying, go get us business. We're like making sure they're really, really well supported because that's what you need to do basically. So that's a lot. I know it's kind of long winded. That's kind of how we think about it.
Well, let's talk about that typical sales prospect or process. What steps are there in a typical sales process? And how many people do you think that a typical client might need as part of their team to make it work?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So my domain expertise is B2B and a generally more complex sales cycle. So it's really going to depend on your offer. It is going to take a lot of trial and error. What I recommend doing is starting with a simpler sales process and then lengthening it from there as you need to. I think Alex Hormozy has a lot of really good stuff on offer creation. If you dig into that, he's made a really good point, which is that like, you could have, a boom market and get everything else wrong and still do really, really well, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in that situation, like, you can make the offer better and then you're like really going crazy and growing and that kind of thing. Or, you could have a normal market and a normal offer, and then from there stems the salesperson and their performance. So it's sort of like the order of operations is market, most important, offer, and then salesperson and their skills and that kind of thing. So the reality is most of us have normal level markets that are kind of like, mature or whatever. And most of us have, either normal offers or worse bad offers. So then the thing is to really work on that offer and make that better as opposed to just prioritizing sales skills. Sales skills matter a lot, It's not that they don't, but they're only going to get you so far. If you have an amazing salesperson, they're super great, but your offer sucks, it's going to be really hard to make them successful. So that's kind of changed my thinking recently after digging through Alex's stuff. But with that in mind, yeah, it takes trial and error. It takes recording the calls that you're on or that your person is on. I think investing in a sales coach is really worth it. It doesn't have to be really expensive, but if you think about it, like in the B2B space, these are big deal sizes. If you're getting like a small single digit boost in performance, that could be millions of dollars, so it's worth the time and so on from there. So there might be more to that question, but those are like a few things that come to mind for sales process.
Yeah, that kind of goes right into my next question is what do you do when you're part of a small team? A lot of the people that watch or listen to this show, they range from agencies all the way down to solopreneurs. So let's look at it from the perspective of a solopreneur. Would you recommend then that they hire a sales coach and learn how to scale their process and do it themselves or outsource it?
Good question. And it sort of depends on like who you're going after and the exact process. I can't say. It just depends on your market and the size of it and what you're doing and that kind of thing. But no, I mean, if you're content being a solopreneur, I don't think you necessarily have to get more help, whether it's out of house or in house. I think that's up to you, obviously, and what you want to do. But I think the main thing is prioritizing top of funnel first and making sure that there's like systems for getting in those prospects. Even if you don't want to grow infinitely, like if you're a solopreneur, there might be a cap on your time or your scalability,
Right.
but at least you can get to the point of having a wait list or being able to choose your clients instead of the other way around. One book that I think is more conducive to this is Oversubscribed by Daniel Priestley. Wrote that book, and it's about getting to the point of being oversubscribed and having wait lists and that kind of thing. So I'd be thinking more in that way.
I like that.
It's somewhat choose your own adventure. I just think that, in our world, if you're hiring for that sales role, you want that person to have like a machine that they slot into, as opposed to like go off into the cold and make up my sales process for me. And this isn't just the sales, like an issue in the sales process. I think it's also like that's a common entrepreneurial error is like, I'm going to delegate something that I haven't really thought through, right? Or something that's bigger than the pay grade that I'm signing up for,
That is such a good point. And actually, the interview that I did right before this one, we talked about the same thing where you can't just outsource something and not have any oversight over it. You need to have a process in place. You need to be able to completely understand what's happening so you know if it's working or not. And if that system is built to work, you could have built a broken system.
Yeah. And I won't lie, like it can be tough hiring for that because you have to know what makes for success in an area that you may or may not have domain expertise in, right? And that's kind of the challenge. So, but at the end of the day, this isn't like an obscure angle of the business. This is like how you eat, right? This is how you win new business. Yeah. So you kind of got to figure it out to some extent. You can have people slot into roles like we slot into the outbound role with our clients all the time. But at the end of the day, they're the ones, closing the business, doing the stuff that only they can do and so on. Yeah.
Let's talk about your book. Can you tell me what it's about and how people can buy it?
Yeah, totally. So it's about a lot of things I've talked about, but overall, I wrote it pretty much to scratch an itch. I just think that the wrong things are being optimized for when it comes to sales and specifically sales prospecting. So it's about how you can do a lot of the things that I talked about, balance personalization and scale, assign the right roles on your team, get in the door tastefully, de-risk conversations and all that stuff. It talks about academically why I think this stuff works and the stages of market sophistication and all that stuff. But if that's boring to you, you can always skip those chapters and just go to like getting stuff done. But anyway, it's called Relationship Sales at Scale. It's on Amazon. If people want to get a link to it, it's and check out, the first chapter and get some more info on it. It's at saleschema.com/RSAS. That's RSAS. And hopefully that's useful.
We'll put that in the show notes and the description wherever the show is. And we'll also put the link to Amazon so you can get it either way. And can you tell everyone how they can work with you and find you how they can work with you and find you online, where you hang out?
Appreciate that, Sarah. So salesschema.com is the best place to kind of see what we're up to. I'm on LinkedIn, Dan Englander, email dan@salesschema.com, and I'm always happy to casually nerd out with people. So I look forward to hearing from everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan, and thanks to all of you for listening today. This wraps up this episode. To reiterate those highlights from today's episode, we learned how to balance personalization and scale to keep your pipeline full, how to de-risk those conversations so skeptical prospects will actually have a conversation with you. And last, that you don't have to be everyone in the sales process. You can divide up prospecting and sales duties so the right people are doing the right job and you can avoid burnout. If you had any questions about this episode, go down to the show notes page and make sure to ask that question. There is a form where you can go there and insert your question via text, or you can send us an audio clip of your question. I would love to hear your beautiful voices and know that I'm not alone talking to my mic in a room right now. I'm talking to all of you. All right, I'll see you next time. Hello, and thank you for joining Tiny Marketing. I help tiny marketing departments create consistent content that builds trust with their audience. Book done-for-you content marketing at sarahnoelblock.com. Don't forget to follow, rate, and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app. See you next time, friends.